Welcome to Brazos Matters. I'm Jay Sokol. So during my years with the City of College Station's Communications and Marketing Office, one of my passion projects was a podcast about economic development. And it turns out that everyone wants to know what's coming to town, when it's coming, and where it's going. New restaurant, new place to shop, some eyesore that's been vacant forever and it's finally going to be redeveloped. It was that sort of thing. Residents loved it, media loved it, and it was a pretty cool way to showcase some of the flashier successes. But even I know that the economic development industry goes way beyond that. It's playing the long game, competing for industries that bring good paying jobs, and a whole lot of them, and finding the right locations, making them shovel ready. You're competing with practically every other town and city in the universe without completely giving away the farm. So how do you do that, and how do you do it well? Well, we're about to find out. Today's guest is Chief Development Officer for the City of College Station, Michael Ostrowski. How are you doing, Michael?
I'm doing well, Jay. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Did I get any of that wrong so far?
Got it correct.
Okay, cool. So when I left City Hall a couple of years ago, you were running the city's Planning and Development Services office. What happened?
That's correct. So I started with the city back in December of 2020 as their Director of Planning and Development Services. For about 3 years, had that role. And then most recently, this past February, the Chief Development Officer role with the city opened, and I applied for that and was selected for that position. That position really is a hybrid position. It works out of the city manager's office, but also serves as the Director of Economic Development and Tourism for the city.
And you have some background in economic development, correct?
I do. So I spent about 10 years in the state of Wisconsin doing both planning and economic development work.
Didn't know that. See, you were hiding out as the planning guy, and I had no idea that was part of your background.
And I mean, both of those areas, planning and economic development, align so closely with one another, from comprehensive planning to strategic planning for economic development related matters. Both of those areas are very close.
Can you describe a little bit about what the main responsibilities are for your office as it relates to economic development and also tourism?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, our office is kind of two separate divisions. One is economic development. That's your traditional trying to attract businesses within the community, whether they're the types of industry sectors that you're looking for or other retail establishments within the community. But really the goal of our office is to create an environment really for them to be successful in. And that's what we've done fairly well. And then from a tourism perspective, also identifying the avenues that we need to take in terms of creating an environment for those events to prosper within our community. So making sure that we have the appropriate infrastructure, making sure that we have the appropriate workforce within our community. Those types of things are what we focus on in order to attract either businesses to our community or having existing ones continue to grow, or attracting events on the tourism side.
And by the way, it's too much, I think, to try and cover economic development and tourism in the time that we have available to us. So is it okay if we have you back pretty soon to discuss tourism?
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to do that. So I'd like to talk about the City of College Station's economic development master plan, because that was adopted, I believe, by the City Council in 2020. I think my office was part of putting that together. There are, as I recall, very broad strategic initiatives and also some more specific sort of to-do items. But there are staff changes and city council changes. You're about to have more city council changes in November. Economic and market conditions change. So how much are you expected to sort of color inside the lines of that plan?
Yeah, so that plan was adopted in 2020, as you mentioned, and a lot has changed since then. We've gone through COVID. One of the other things, too, is that tourism was a separate agency at that particular time. It was experienced by College Station, so we brought tourism in-house, which will change our economic development strategy moving forward. So, over this next year, it's one of our SLAs, our service level adjustment that we've submitted for budget next year, is to update our economic development master plan to make sure that, we're going after the appropriate industry sectors for our economy. One of the things that has been a challenge for us is that, we've our ability to take in additional land into the community, for example, through annexation has been limited due to state law changes back in 2019. So it's a very different approach that we'll be going forward now, as a lot of our economic development strategy will be redevelopment and focusing on, other, IT, professional service type industries. As we move forward, we focused heavily on biotech with Fujifilm, Medica Biotechnologies, but also as another industry sector that will likely be targeting will be animal health related services. We've seen with A&M and the partner that they have with the vet school and the programs that they have here, as well as companies like Zoetis and Farah Diagnostics, that there are a lot of animal health related entities here, and there's a lot of research and development that's going on here. So our ability to attract firms like that in those types of industry sectors will be all that more important.
Can you talk about what kinds of strategies or priorities or philosophies are defined in the strategic master plan, or what you expect to be defined in the next version?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is just identifying those types of industry sectors, right? And then as you identify the types of industry sectors that you want to try to attract, that's when you start creating your environment to make sure that you have the appropriate resources that you're going to be going after. For example, if one wanted to go after heavier manufacturing type businesses, it'd be very different than going after high-tech industry or research and development. So one of the things that we'll have to identify is what specific types of industries that we want to go after and attract. And we've got a pretty good idea of what those are currently, but refining those mechanisms. And then after we do that, we start to identify, what pieces that we're missing in order to improve upon, whether it's land or whether it's, additional resources that we need to put into the community. But the other thing that I think is all that more important is developing partnerships with the different agencies and organizations that we have in our community. And I think our biggest partnerships really rely on our private sector. And so as we continue to work with our existing businesses to determine, what their needs are, what their concerns are, most of our new growth will likely be from our existing businesses and having them continue to expand. So, we'll continue to focus on what their needs are as a community and how we can help them grow as a company.
Can you give me an example or even a hypothetical of what you're talking about in that regard?
Yeah, so one of the programs that we're going to be looking at doing is revamping our business retention and expansion program, right? So going out to those businesses, doing interviews, and really having a conversation with different industry sectors and the businesses within those industry sectors within our community to determine kind of what challenges they may be facing, what may be preventing them from growing even more within our community, or just what is needed for them to be more successful in our community. So developing those relationships, identifying what those concerns may be with a particular business, and then we can find ways to address those concerns.
How scalable are you talking about? Are we talking about businesses or industries of a certain size, or are you going all the way down to kind of a mom and pop level?
And it can be both, right? So you can go with, a number of communities will focus on just some of their major employers, but I think to be really successful, you've got to go at all spectrums of your economy. In particular, those, as we go through our economic development master planning efforts and identifying, which areas of industry that we want to focus on, it's really focusing on those existing businesses that are in those particular areas of focus that you want to go after. And they may be large companies, but they also may be very small companies looking to expand.
So with your experiences in Wisconsin, and then I think you first came to Texas to San Marcos, is that right?
That's correct.
So with those perspectives, do you see things, either opportunities or gaps, that maybe we haven't identified as a city or a community just because it's not something that's obvious to us?
I think one of the things too, a lot of people associate economic development with just businesses, right? And I think one of the things that you have with College Station and the home of Texas A&M is that there are other components that can be economic development, meaning that student housing is a very large economic driver within our community. So, as we continue to look at our economic development master plan and kind of where we want to focus in our maybe inability to continue to grow outwards from our boundaries, we also are going to have to focus on looking at redevelopment opportunities. And we've seen a lot of that happen in the Northgate area with a lot of high rises, and a lot of value has gone into Northgate. One of the things that we're going to be moving forward with is a fiscal analysis. We're actually under contract with a consultant putting together a fiscal analysis that will allow us to better analyze different types of developments that are coming into the city and making sure that they are financially stable as we move forward. So oftentimes when some developments come in that may be a lower value development or a lower density development, they often don't pay for themselves. And so one of the things that we want to get a better handle on is that when a development comes in, what really is that financial impact on the city, so we can make sure that we're sustainable from a financial standpoint.
Right. What are some of the other primary areas for redevelopment that your office is looking at right now?
Yeah, so our comprehensive plan identifies several areas for redevelopment or small area planning. Northgate was one of them. We did planning efforts back 20 years ago, and now you can see a lot of the results coming forward with the number of developments happening in Northgate. Another area that we just completed was the Northeast Gateway. That is on Texas and University, so that intersection there really on the southeast side of that, and then the north side of University. And then two other areas of focus will be the Harvey Road corridor and the Post Oak Mall, and then also the George Bush and Wellborn intersection.
Yeah. How do you attack something like the Harvey Road corridor? Because it has evolved in a certain way, over the decades, and now it needs to evolve maybe in a different way. How do you go about making that happen or facilitating that happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the first steps in there is through our comprehensive planning process. So as I was in planning and development services, making sure that we have a plan for that area moving forward over the next 20 or so years. We've identified that area, especially on the corner of George Bush and Wellborn, as a more urban style area. So very similar to what you would probably see in a little bit lower density Northgate, especially along the frontages of Wellborn and George Bush. So the first thing you're going to do there is making sure that you've identified the land use and make sure that future land use is appropriate. But then the next step is really rezoning those properties and working with the private sector to help with land assembly. A lot of those properties can be owned by multiple property owners, which makes it hard to do a larger scale development. But working on land assemblage with private development owners or private developers to get a large enough area to do a project there. So that will be one of our next areas of growth as the interchange goes in with George Bush and Wellborn.
You mentioned Post Oak Mall. What can we know about that?
Yeah, I mean, we continue to work with Post Oak Mall. I had a conversation with the mall owners the other day looking for opportunities there. But that small area planning effort will be a larger area. So one of the things that we want to focus on is, not only looking at potential redevelopment areas around the mall and helping support that so we can continue to drive traffic to that mall, but how that connects to the other areas within the city, right? So, the other major area over in that location is Wolfpen Creek. And so how do we activate Wolfpen Creek? How do we, tie the mall in with Wolfpen Creek? And then also, how do you tie the mall in with the university? A lot of the, individuals live in around the university. So how do we make it easier for individuals to get back and forth between those two locations? We see that corridor as being a longer term play in terms of a redevelopment that will likely be, a mix of commercial and housing opportunities. We're seeing a significant growth in the university population, seeing a significant growth in the city population. So we're trying to find additional areas for those folks to live.
You had talked a little bit ago about identifying target industry sectors. What are we built to do well in College Station?
Yeah, what are we built to do well? I mean, one of the first things, as an economic development strategy is you look to what are your competitive advantages, right? And so our major competitive advantage is no secret. It's Texas A&M and everything that Texas A&M brings from a research and innovation standpoint. So, what we're built to do well in College Station is really targeting those high-tech firms, those biotech, industry-related type firms, because we have the resources available here. The big part about that is just connecting those resources and making sure that businesses know that they exist and that there are opportunities for them to partner with those agencies.
Yeah. And so I guess that ties into any sort of initiative you have related to entrepreneurship, because I assume there is always the challenge of preventing brain drain, I think is the term, where we have these brilliant people who come through and graduate Texas A&M, and a lot of times they go off and do great things elsewhere. And so I assume there is a connection to some kind of an entrepreneurship retention or incentive type program.
Absolutely. So that'll be one of our strategies moving forward, especially as we work through our economic development master plan. We have a lot of bright-minded individuals who can create some very successful companies, and we want to keep them here. One of the hardest things I think in economic development is attracting that big fish, right? And going after that huge employer that's going to bring hundreds of jobs and maybe thousands of jobs. And that can have its own challenges as we move forward. But one of the most fruitful things that cities can do is continuing to build with their existing businesses and continuing to help them grow, but also finding ways to keep those young entrepreneurs or other entrepreneurs within our community and finding ways to make them successful in building their own company. So one of the things that we're looking forward right now is creating an entrepreneurial program within the city of College Station. We'll likely start as a digital program. It's a resource that we're working through that will connect entrepreneurs with potential investors, potential additional educational resources if they need help writing business plans, but really creating that environment and that ecosystem for them to be successful in kind of working through the initial stages of a company startup. So that's what we're looking forward to, hopefully working with the company to get that program off the ground later this year. But as we continue to build membership through that program, then looking at potentially a physical location, them to be housed here and creating some sort of business incubator, and then kind of that next step is finding ways to kind of accelerate those individuals in those businesses.
Yeah. If you just tuned in, I'm Jay Sokol. You're listening to Brazos Matters, and our guest is Michael Ostrowski, Chief Development Officer for the City of College Station. He oversees economic development and tourism for the city. How does College Station work to get noticed? Obviously, we are home of Texas A&M University, but what kind of extraordinary efforts do you and your staff go to make sure the right industries know about College Station?
Yeah, and that's a big thing too, is that we're out often at different events and shows. For example, a few weeks ago, our staff was out in Las Vegas at ICSC, which is one of the largest retail events in the country, working with businesses and making them aware of College Station and all that we have to offer here. But also, one of the other things too is working with the state. The state of Texas is very important. Oftentimes, a lot of large leads that are coming to Texas come through the state and then ultimately through our regional economic development partners. So making sure that we're building those partnerships with the appropriate agencies through the state office, attending those shows, but also working with our existing businesses to see who their partners are, right? Who their suppliers and who their buyers are, that maybe we can have them locate to this community as well.
There is a legislative session coming up in 2025, and I just wondered, does that affect you at all? Is there anything that you guys try to lobby for, lobby against? Is that impactful to your world in any way?
It does, especially on the municipal side. So as there are changes at the state level, they can have effects on kind of what we do. We saw a lot of that the last one with the planning related side of things. So there was a lot of bills there was bills passed relating to ETJ regulation. So those can have a significant impact on how we continue to plan for growth in our city. One of the bills that was passed last time was the ETJ release bill, where property owners could petition the city to request to be released from the ETJ. Now, with that being the case, one of the reasons why the ETJ was put in place is that we have proper planning around our city and making sure that there are areas as we continue to grow that will meet certain specifications and requirements as we grow. So making sure that the roads are laid out appropriately so we don't have additional costs as we move forward.
How much, because in your previous role as Director of Planning and Development Services, you, I think, were integrated with a lot of other city departments. And I'm wondering if that integration extends into economic development when we're talking about parks and recreation, green spaces, quality law enforcement, fire protection, all those things. Do you kind of see a bigger picture than maybe we have historically when it comes to economic development?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, economic development, it's not done in a vacuum, right? So there are so many different partners with economic development. It's not done by a single person or a single department. We work heavily with the various city departments, Parks and Recreation, for example. Making sure there are quality, accessible parks within our community is a huge quality of life initiative as we try to attract individuals to our community who become the workforce for companies looking to come to our community. Working with police and fire departments, making sure that we have a safe city that has a low crime rate. That is often, one of the things that companies look for when they're choosing to locate here. Working with the various utility departments to make sure that we have adequate utility capacity as we look at attracting companies to our location. So as we work as a department, we're always reaching out to our other departments and making sure that we're bringing them into the loop with any particular businesses that we're trying to attract or any of the planning efforts that we're moving forward with.
I know you had a list of items that you brought as well to talk about. What are a couple of highlights that I haven't asked you about so far, but you'd really like to talk about?
Yeah, I think, you've hit on most of them, but, one of the things that I think is going to be absolutely important is as we move forward in making sure with our economic development strategy, a lot of it is going to be redevelopment of existing property. So making sure that we're identifying those corridors and identifying those areas that have proper redevelopment potential, but then focusing on, what types of developments that will occur within those areas, I think is going to be all that more important. And as we do that, again, as mentioned previously, was making sure that they're financially sound as we move forward, and that the developments that we're looking to put in do pay for themselves from a revenue standpoint, and then do ultimately become a betterment for the city moving forward.
Yeah. What are some numbers or metrics that you watch to sort of know how conditions are, whether it's quarterly or annually, what those charts and graphs look like from tax revenue standpoint? What are some things that you watch?
Absolutely. So, one of the things that we look upon is our construction value. So last year, our permit value was about $555 million worth of permit value. So that's a pretty good indicator of, what is going on within the economy in terms of value. This last year, we saw a pretty sizable jump in commercial, a lot of that due to Fujifilm, but that's one of the large indicators that we'll look for. Some of the other indicators that we look for is sales tax that is generated within the local economy, making sure that our retail sector is doing well and people are out patronizing those businesses. And then really on the tourism side, one of the things that we look for is kind of our hotel occupancy tax and kind of seeing, what sort of value that is being brought in. And, we're seeing a lot of room nights over the last fiscal year, and that has been increasing pretty significantly as well. And especially with some of the larger events that have happened recently, whether it's the MEX Tour or the George Strait concert or USA Track and Field, those will lead heavily to kind of some of the indicators that we're looking at.
Yeah, those have been real gifts to College Station and Brian, the entire community. Those have been fantastic.
They have.
And we're going to talk more. Again, we're going to visit at another time and really do a deeper dive on tourism, because I think that can be a conversation all by itself. Are there any additional sort of quality of life initiatives that, from the economic development standpoint, that you guys focus on?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the, as I mentioned, whether it's one of the things that the city is also undertaking is an affordable housing plan. Housing is absolutely critical, and it's becoming even more and more challenging to find housing. And it's not just a College Station issue; it's all over the country. And so, one of the things that our community services department is working on is finding ways to make housing more affordable. And what are the things that we can do? They're starting to wrap up that plan and looking and finding specific action items that we can start to undertake to maybe help make some of that housing more affordable. We're seeing, population growth of probably 2.5% to 3% a year, which is a fairly steady growth rate, which I think it's one of the benefits. And you mentioned kind of looking at, my different locations. The one thing about College Station is that you've had a fairly steady growth rate that has pretty much mirrored the university enrollment in 2.5% to 3%, and that's a lot easier to plan for and adjust to than you see a lot of communities that may jump up 10, 20%, which is very difficult to plan for and adjust to as they come in.
Okay, so do I need to try to put the squeeze on you to tell me what's coming to town? Because that's what I would have done previously.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some really good opportunities. Most recently, we've had a couple of sales in our College Station Business Center. So we've sold all of our properties, or at least one of them still going through the feasibility period. So one is a Hunton. It's a warehousing and distribution facility in the College Station Business Center right next to FedEx. They're looking at doing about an 80,000 square foot. They work with heating and ventilation equipment for train. And then next to that, we've worked with Farah. It's a company who produces animal health related projects. They're looking at taking the last two lots within the business center there. And then we'll be working our next step will be the Midtown Business Center, which will be just next right behind Costco. There's about 200 acres of land that we'll work through and trying to redevelop that into the business center. We've been working with and just put out again, the city owns about 28 acres of land next to Costco. So that has now been listed for sale for potential redevelopment. And we expect to have some bids on that relatively shortly. But we've seen also a lot of development along the university corridor, for example, in the retail aspect of it, REI coming in, Crunch Fitness, repurposing of those types of businesses, like the former Albertson right next to that. Their Drury Hotel will be next to that. So those are the types of things that we'll be focusing on and trying to have a redevelopment of those underutilized properties or those vacant properties moving forward.
Did I see any kind of rumblings about like Trader Joe's and Whole Foods kicking tires around here again? Yeah,
so I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, I think Trader Joe's and Buc-ee's have been the two establishments on the top of everybody's list here. Yeah. But we continue to pursue those companies. Hopefully, we're able to land one fairly soon. But Trader Joe's, Buc-ee's, Whole Foods, that seems to be what everybody wants.
Well, as we used to talk about, like the first iteration of the College Station podcast about economic development, we called it, "Is This a Thing?" Because it was never a thing until it was really a thing. That was sort of the theme of the show, because things can fall apart virtually at the last minute. So I think you have a challenging job, but boy, it's an important job. So I really appreciate you coming in and talking about it. And again, we're going to have you back so we can talk about tourism. So Michael Ostrowski, thanks so much for joining us here at the studio.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate it.
You bet. Brazos Matters is a production of Aggieland's Public Radio, 90.9 KAMU FM, a member of Texas A&M University's Division of Marketing and Communications. Our show is engineered and edited by Matt Dittman. All Brazos Matters episodes are available on the KAMU website, also on the NPR app, YouTube, or on your favorite podcast platform. We would love for you to rate and review and even subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Jay Sokol. Thanks so much for listening to Brazos Matters. Have a great day.